Moses, you gotta like love this guy, kind of like his naivety a bit, because it's hard in the King James to really catch what he's saying, but he's reminding God, well, listen, you warned us about touching the mountain already, and they said they would obey you. And God is saying, yeah, whatever. Go down there and tell them not to touch the mountain. And then Moses is like, but they said they wouldn't. Do you remember Jesus in John chapter 2 when it says he knew what was in the heart of man? Which is like, it really doesn't matter what you say, kind of, because I know what's in your heart. And you can almost see that between Moses and God there. Moses is like, but they said they wouldn't do it. And he said, yeah, I know. But go down there and tell them not to, because if they do, they're going to die. These are the guys I want you to bring up to the mountain with me. I mean, God is still working through, he knows his kids. If nothing else, at least 3 of the 4 of us in the room, we know our kids. And a lot of times it's kind of like, yeah, well, they said this. Okay, yeah, whatever. And we just move on because we know our kids and we know what they're going to do. It's as simple as that. And God he's bypassing the fact that they said they're going to obey him, which they're not. He's bypassing that and saying, but they can't touch the mountain. This is really, really important that they don't touch the mountain. It's all about touch. The glory had refreshed their soul. Immediately following the thing that Keith just read in Exodus 19, we get the 10 Commandments. The Decalogue, however you want to call it, in Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. The question that kind of bears asking a bit, so was this the plan? After this whole thing takes place, now he gives Moses these 10 commandments in stone to take back to the people, kind of thing. Stone tablets. So is that the plan all along? I'm going to write down my 10 commandments for them. Or back in Exodus 19 when he says, if they obey my voice. Those are 2 different things. I mean, if I was to write down a list of things for someone and said, do these things, that's not really obeying my voice. My voice is saying to you, I would like you to do this. It's my voice. They're 2 different things, getting into the voice or getting into the commandments kind of thing. Well, let's continue on. In chapter 20, we've gotten to the point now where we've had this scene, the thick cloud, the thunders, the lightnings, everything's going on. God gives Moses the 10 commandments. Yep. Chapter 20, verses 18 through 21.
And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoke. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood far off. And they said to Moses, speak to us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, fear not, for God has come to prove you that his fear may be before your faces, that you sin not. And the people stood far off, and Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was.
He already announced that it's going to be different. See, they had the cloud with them. Everything was going nice. I like clouds. Works well. But now they're getting into something a bit different, a thick cloud. A different kind of thing is happening. But he's the same God. Same God. Different kind of manifestation is going on now. They look at the manifestation, and the first thing they do is step back. Now, God called them to the mountain, but not to touch it. So he was not telling them, get away from me. In fact, he was saying the opposite in Exodus 19. We need to stay close together so you can hear my voice. But now they're stepping back. They go beyond, and it says twice that they stepped back. And you said, that's weird, and it is weird wording, but it's very clear. They're moving away from the mountain they were called to. And now they've got a plan. Moses, you speak to us, not God. Well, I don't know how you hear that, but to me that sounds like the termination of a relationship. If I was to say to anybody, from now on, David, I don't really want to talk to Glory anymore. From now on, you're going to go. I'm going to tell you something. You go ahead and you talk to Glory, and I'll talk to you, and she'll talk. And that's my go-between now. That is the separation and termination of a relationship. But what's it due to? It's very clear. Something that Moses told them they don't have to do. He says, don't be afraid. Here's what's going on here. Let me explain to you what's going on. We're going into something new. You're seeing a different aspect of God, the thick cloud, all these manifestations and all that. He said, so that you don't sin, which is kind of an interesting interpretation. You're talking about prophetic interpretation, because God didn't say that. Moses did. Moses is looking at it and saying, we're coming into a place to understand how important it is for you not to engage in sin. I mean, remember, God's already refreshed their souls. He's the one who makes us whole. But there's something else happening now, a different kind of warning taking place. And they opt to give in to the fear, and as a result, end up with this religion over relationship. But at the heart of it, they get the religion instead of the relationship out of fear. But the thing is, the issue that Moses is bringing to the people is this awful thing called sin. Now, the question is, how did they process sin apart from the law? Remember, they don't have the Ten Commandments yet. 10 Commandments. Don't steal. I go and I steal. You've committed a sin. I don't have 10 Commandments. Not yet, anyway. How? Moses says, so you don't sin. So what does that mean to them, that you don't sin? I don't know if you ever thought about it that way. No 10 Commandments. Well, then how do I know what's right and wrong, what to do, what not to do? Paul talks about, later in Romans, in the 5th chapter, about sin entering the world. We've read this a zillion times. Keep that in mind. Sin enters the world. Moses said, so that you don't sin. Sin has already entered the world. Apparently, it hasn't entered the children of Israel, but it's entered the world. Sin is in the world. Romans 5. What does he say in Romans 3:20?
Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin.
For by the law is the knowledge of sin. No law, no knowledge of sin. God's doing this so that you don't sin. Well, what's that about? Well, so you don't break the law. What law? We don't have a law yet. What are you talking about? This is what's going on in this setting. Sin entered the world, Paul says. The question is from where? And this may be something you've never thought about quite this way. But sin entered the world. It didn't originate here, right? That's what Paul says, that sin entered the world. Sin happened someplace outside this world, before Adam. That's what it says. By the disobedience of Adam, sin, the door opened and sin came in. But sin was already in existence, just not here. I don't know if you ever thought about it that way. You know, while we're so quick to make sure we understand what a disgusting planet we're on and what sinners we are, the point is that sin came from someplace else. God has a very unusual way of saying, I know, sin entered the world. It came from outside. I'm going to deal with this thing. And I don't want you to. If you look, we won't do it this morning, but if you go to Ezekiel 28, talks about Lucifer, and Isaiah 14, you can go there and read where sin originated. We won't do it this morning. It's good to do, though, because you can see it originated in the realm, the heavenly kind of realm, with this bad angel. He makes his way into the Garden of Eden, and he's got one thing on his mind: to lead men to the place, contrary to what God said, to allow sin to enter the world. Again, God warns Adam, and the day that you eat, you shall surely die, which is a nice way of saying, if you disobey me, then you will allow sin to come into the world. The wages of sin is death, you'll die. It's all pretty simple stuff, really. But my question still remains, the people at the mountain, how did they process this thing called sin? Well, the first time that it's mentioned is with Cain and Abel. When God, in Genesis 4, when God tells Cain, why are you so angry? You've got anger issues. If you don't deal with your anger issues, right now you have authority over sin. But if you don't deal with your anger issues, if you act out of anger against your brother, you're going to allow sin in. So he mentions sin. Remember, anger is an issue of the soul. And when we are being enraged and angered, the anger itself is not the sin. It's what we do as a result. And he kills his brother, manifesting the enemy, because that's what 1 John says. 1 John 3:12 says the wicked one, in the previous chapter, gained entrance into Cain, and so he acted the same way that the enemy did. He got angry and killed somebody, his brother. When you go down into Genesis 13 and 18, when God talks about Sodom and their activities, he calls it sinful. And again, there's other scriptures that'll be in your notes on Monday. But the point is that he calls these activities that are going on in Sodom, these wicked things that they're doing to their bodies, that Paul talks about in Romans 1. When he says, God was present. He was aware. They all knew God by creation itself. And they denied him and they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. So he gave them over to these vile affections of their bodies and all that kind of. Let them get on with it. Sinful activities. In Genesis 20, there's a story about Abraham and Abimelech, where God does not allow Abimelech to sin against him. Genesis 31, I don't know if you remember when Jacob leaves Laban with his 2 wives and his kids, and he books. He's out of there because things are getting bad. And his wife Rachel steals the idols, the family idols. And so Laban goes chasing after Jacob, doesn't find the idols, so Jacob says to Laban, so, now that you've searched us and you haven't found what you were looking for, can you tell me what's the real sin going on here? What did I do to you? What was my sin? What was my offense against you? Why are you chasing me? Sin is mentioned again in Genesis 39. Now remember, these are all without the law. These are when sin was mentioned, when Joseph says to Potiphar's wife, who's coming on to him, I can't do this thing. It would be a sin against God. I ain't going to do it. In Genesis 42, when Joseph sends his brothers back to Canaan to get Benjamin, who Jacob did not want to let go, and Reuben's telling his brothers, you see this? This is what we get for sinning against our brother. And Genesis 50 closes with them asking for forgiveness from Joseph for what they did, their sin against him. That's all in Genesis. As we get into their present, I say their present, the ones coming out of Egypt, their most recent present, not 400 or 1,000 years earlier, but their most recent present. If we go to Exodus 9, it'd be like being in March of 2018, where we are right now, where we live. Before the 7th plague, which is a plague of hail, there's like 10 plagues, this one is the one of hail. Each plague, there was a different Egyptian god, that God was doing something to show them that their god system, their religion, these were false gods, they were not true gods.